Good afternoon in the eastern part of the US and whatever time zone you're in. NDLTD is one of the platinum sponsors for this conference. NDLTD stands for the Network Digital Library of Theses and Dissertations, for which I serve as Executive Director and Chairman of the Board. I would like to acknowledge, since this is a conference with many people contributing, first, on a personal level, all those who've helped me get to where I am and supported the work I've been doing. Broadly, all those who work with ETDs. That includes NDLTD, its members, its board, its committees, its working groups, its task forces, as well as the USETDA, and especially those who've been involved in preparing this conference, as well as the presenters, the attendees, and the sponsors. NDLTD is the advocate for those who create ETDs, those who want to expand access, those who are interested in preserving knowledge, those who are improving graduate education, those who are enhancing scholarly communication, those who are empowering the students and the universities in which they work. NDLTD is the leader of the worldwide ETD initiative. So please join us and please help out. And I know many people do many different things, but if any of these are near and dear to your heart, please also support NDLTD. Sometimes I wonder why I ever came up with this crazy acronym. One of the people who I work with who has a more corporate perspective says, well, think of this as ND Limited. Another one who has a more culinary focus says, well, think of Noodle TD. Whatever helps you remember this, you can also get to our website from theses.org and dissertations.org. The vision behind this is that every thesis and dissertation in the whole world should be devised to take advantage of the most helpful electronic publishing methods. That keeps changing, and so there's always room for this to grow and to expand. Those works should be shared globally and easily found, and they should be supported by a suite of digital library services to aid the authors, the researchers, the learners, and the universities. We've been using many technologies, some of which evolved recently, but most of which have been around for a number of years. And so part of our goal is to keep improving those services and those technologies and to make sure that they're more widely used. So you'll hear more about this in the conference, especially in the parallel track breakout sessions. We'll talk about some of the interesting research. They also need to be preserved and accordingly migrated permanently so they'll be accessible. So the mission of NDLTD as an international organization is to promote the entire life cycle of better support for ETDs, from their adoption at institutions, from their creation by authors, through their dissemination, their broad use, and long-term preservations. And we encourage all the institutions that are interested in any of this to better provide open access to scholarship this way, to share knowledge more effectively, and therefore to unlock the potential benefits of this wonderful genre, which has been largely ignored as people focus on journals and conferences and reports. The spirit of NDLTD is to help those who think about this or hear about this to not be afraid, to have confidence that this is important, and to help promote the sharing. This helps make our world better and smaller. Everyone can win, everyone can benefit from this process. I hope those at this conference and other venues will have fun as they get involved in this. This is a nice, friendly community. Everyone's being encouraged to help out. And some of this has to do with building even better standards than we have, and to make sure that the ETDs all around the world are preserved, they become more popular, they become more expressive, and so much better in so many different ways. As the advisor for over 100 theses and dissertations, I've spent a lot of time working with students and with others to help this happen, specifically personally and with all of those folks, but also people all around the world have been engaged in this process. So this is doable, it's feasible, people can learn all the things they need to do, it saves money, it's a good opportunity for sharing. So please do support NDLTD. I accordingly invite everyone who's involved in this conference and is contributing to this to serve as an ambassador to bring the news back home after this conference, to share about what happened at this conference, which you'll be able to get to from the websites, and especially if you're members fairly early, but everyone in the world will have access to all this information as well as what gets published in the related journal, JETD. During and after the conference, please don't be shy. Ask questions, share your thoughts, and help make both the ETD 2025, USETDA 2025, and the broad ETD movement a greater success. So feel free to contact me. I'm fox@ndltd.org. That's one of my many addresses. Or to contact any of the board members at NDLTD who are contributing to this, and many who are participating in this conference. They're all around the world, so they may be in and out depending on time zones. Also, the board members of USETDA, and we're so pleased to be working together again.
Thank you, Ed. Really appreciate you and all the work that you do. Now I'd like to welcome you to the places you'll go with your scholarly works. Sharing this information with you is Lily Compton and Kristen Terrell from the Center for Communication Excellence, Graduate College, Iowa State University, and Megan O'Donnell from the University Library at Iowa State University. My name is Kim Fleshman, and I will be your moderator for the next 90 minutes. During concurrent sessions, one session will be held in the main room while another session will be in the breakout room. For all sessions, be sure to reserve 5 to 10 minutes at the end for quick discussion. And just a reminder, during the presentation portion, participants should keep your audio muted. Please feel free to use the Zoom chat to ask questions, which will be addressed during the discussion segment. Thank you all for joining us, and I'll turn it over to Lily, Kristen, and Megan.
Thank you, Kim. Just making sure that my audio is okay. So perfect. Thanks for the thumbs up. So thank you again, Kim. Within the first year of stepping into my position as a thesis dissertation program supervisor in a graduate college at Iowa State, my reviewer pointed out that she read 2 identical dissertations. So I asked her what she meant, and she said, well, other than the introduction and conclusion, all the chapters were the same. So I looked at the 2 dissertations and then compared them and did some investigation and discovered that the 2 students had co-authored manuscripts and taken turns being the first author. They worked in the same lab, they shared the same major professor, but had different committee members. So I brought that up to our graduate college dean's attention. In a different scenario, my dean forwarded me an email from a book author with a complaint that her photo had been used without her permission in one of our graduate students' work. And that student's work had been covered by the local news and gotten significant media coverage. So that was how the author discovered that her photo had been used without permission. Now, obviously, the author was upset, but more than that, it was a copyright infringement. Kristen, could you switch slides to the next slide? One more. So now, one before. Okay. In both situations, I'm happy to share that I was able to address them successfully, but these issues were not uncommon. I would receive questions about copyright, authorship, plagiarism, and more on a regular basis. These were similar patterns from graduate students and faculty. Now, there were plenty of guidance and resources at our institution. For example, our library have useful guides about copyright and about thesis and dissertations. Some of these guides have been well prepared with our university legal counsel. But the questions would often be directed to the graduate college because the final thesis and dissertation format review was conducted by us. Now in this picture here, you can see the analogy of silos and mazes because we are in Iowa to illustrate how the expertise are scattered on campus. Each unit has expertise, they're the silos, but then around the silos are mazes where the students then have to navigate through these complicated mazes to get to the guidance they need. Kristen, next slide. So now with each case that I worked on, I reached out to the experts on campus because I was new. I had to learn to identify the underlying issues, and then I was eventually able to recognize and provide guidance more easily. But even then, there was still one thing missing. I felt like I was constantly being on the defense, trying to help the students only when they came to my office. So many students plow through these challenges on their own, and some of them graduate, and then the issues don't surface until years after they graduate, right? So unfortunately, this was usually very late in the game because they were about to graduate, and the final thesis and dissertation review process became a barrier to graduation. So I started to think about ways where we can be more proactive, and the answer came as this analogy of a garden path. Now, what if we could provide a more effective, centralized, and sustainable information source that can be integrated into courses right from the start of the graduate education and then utilized throughout the whole academic journey? Next slide. So here's our vision. Our vision was a one book to help them all. Okay, my slide is here. This book that we have a vision for is an open educational resource. That means it's free, that empowers graduate students, postdocs, and early career researchers. And we did a bit of an investigation, and we knew that there wasn't quite a book like this out so far. But then hearing all the experiences from our USETDA and our peers from other units, we knew that there was a need for this focus. And the goal of this book was to help graduate students, postdocs, and early career researchers understand their role as a new scholar, then streamline access to valuable information, establish and protect their professional credibility, report and publish results with integrity, and then prepare and complete electronic theses and dissertations that meet institutional, state, and federal guidelines. Next slide. So, next slide, Kristen. In spring 2023, in spring 2023, there was a call for proposal. It was the Affordable Course Materials Jumpstart Initiative by Iowa State's President's Office. And the grant requirement was that we needed to enhance the affordability of course materials across the university. And so our project goal aligned with this because we made this open educational resource, which means it's no cost, to Iowa State and beyond. So that means, wherever you are today, you will be able to get a free copy. And as I mentioned earlier, we focus on the content, which was the knowledge gap for new scholars. And we needed to align this with Iowa State University's strategic plan, and we chose this particular one. Iowa State University strives to be the most student-centric leading research university. And you'll see the little screenshot on the right, there's measurable success factors, and the one we focused on was accessibility and affordability. Next slide. So on this slide here, you can see how we organize the book. We made this book to be like a survival guide. And it has 15 self-contained chapters with cross-references. That means each chapter can be read on its own, but then if there are references to some concept, it can be linked to another chapter. It starts with familiar topics like literature review, and then transitions to more complex topics like what does the publishing process looks like, or what does it mean to be ethical as a researcher? And then the most current one that's on many people's minds, what does it mean to produce a digitally accessible thesis or dissertation or manuscript? Now, at the time when we were starting to write the manuscript, Gen AI use and impact in academia was still very new and being explored by different networks and organizations. So even now, guidance to Gen AI is still not widely standardized. And we were concerned that if we wrote a chapter on it, the guidance would be outdated too quickly. So as we learn more about how Gen AI works, we discovered that the benefits and limitations were actually closely tied to the principles that were already covered in the respective chapters. So we decided that the details related to Gen AI would be integrated throughout the book instead of a dedicated chapter. So our goal today for this plenary is to give you a preview of these chapters, and our hope is to provide all of you with this resource so that you can use it at your institutions, whether to share it with faculty and students, or as a guide for yourself as an ETDA, an administrator, when you need to explain a concept or a principle to your stakeholders, be it faculty, staff, administrator in your university. So now, as you can see on the screen, there are three main sections that we cover. We cover the basics, then we cover the ethics, and then we cover the technology. And as we go through each part, we will take some questions before moving on to the next part. At the end of all three parts, we will also do another round of Q&A. So feel free to post your questions in the chat, and then each of us will take turns covering those questions before we move on. I will now hand it over to Megan to cover the first part on basics.
Thanks, Lily. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan, and I led the development and writing of part 1 of our book. The library's interest in this project came about because we collaborated with the Graduate College in the past with questions related to copyright and with teaching workshops on things like literature reviews. But my personal interest in this project is due to over a decade of observing and working with grad students and seeing them flounder while trying to locate the right people and resources in order to complete their work and to complete it well. While I specialize in data management now, I used to be a subject librarian and a scholarly communication librarian, so I worked with a lot of issues like copyright, which intersected with both article writing and theses and dissertations. And I also worked closely with graduate students on preparing for literature reviews, managing citations, and learning how to use databases. In this role, I also saw new faculty come in with incomplete information, which would then get passed on to their students. And when Kristen and Lily approached me with this idea, I really thought it was a wonderful idea and with very little convincing signed on. Next slide, please. So my section we called the basics, and naming the section was a little complicated because while it sounds like everyone has to do a literature review, that's kind of basic, but they're not necessarily easy. But the reason we settled on calling it basics is that it introduces topics like citations that you have to be able to understand before you understand more complex topics like plagiarism, which are introduced later in the book. So we settled on 5 themes: literature reviews, citations, literature searches, the publishing process, and research impact. And each one of these chapters, as Lily mentioned, it stands alone on its own, but also they build and intersect with each other as well. So let's talk about chapter 1, literature reviews. Next slide. So one of the guiding principles behind this book, and that I really tried to do while writing and developing this content, is that we really focused on assuming that we couldn't know what students were bringing in with them because there are so many different routes to graduate school. So could we assume that they knew that literature reviews are both an active research as well as an active written product? Not really. Did they know that there are different types of literature reviews? They might not, depending on the coursework they've taken before. And do they understand that some of these types of reviews are very rigorous rules that you have to observe from the start in order to have a successful review? Probably not unless you have done something in biomedical research before. But these rigorous reviews are becoming more popular in disciplines like agriculture and education as well. So it's important for students of all disciplines to understand they exist. So for this reason, we start by introducing the literature review as an active research that grounds writing, which then links your work to the work of others. Next, we move on to how the literature review types and the different kinds of possibilities that are out there, what they're good for, and what their limitations are. I didn't include every possible type, and part of this was there's no consensus on how many different types there are and what the definition for each type is. So instead, it's kind of like a little exploratory sampling of about 6 different types. And for each type, I identified what they're best for, the type of searches you have to do to complete a literature review, the kind of analysis you're going to be running on the literature you get from those searches, how you're going to be synthesizing that information, and how you're reporting it, which is typically writing, but sometimes it's also visuals as well. And as an example, I have the one up here for scoping reviews, which can be used to explore which already exists and might just be a pre-stage for further research instead of an actual written product. AI tools intersected this section pretty heavily because we saw almost immediately people starting to use generative AI tools to search for literature. And while there's a whole separate chapter on searching for literature, we wanted to also address them in the literature review chapter because they are poor matches for some of the systematic and systematized reviews that are out there. So what we included instead in here was an author AI use checklist from Chang, Calhoun, and Reedy, which is a great article. I will provide a link to it in the chat if my computer will cooperate. And this checklist kind of provides a nice, just generalized, very simple way to decide if you should be using an AI tool in general with your writing. Okay, I think I finally got the link to work. Let me put it in chat. There you go. Next slide, please. Okay, chapter 2, citations, and then also citation management. For this chapter, this was fun for me to write, probably because I'm a librarian and I'm interested in looking at how information is linked together. However, it was also tricky to write because there are many different things associated with citations, including plagiarism. We know grad students come with these different levels of writing experience in education, and that the experience with citations in undergrad up until graduate school is mostly about avoiding plagiarism and also how to format citations. But there's a lot more to citations than just formatting and avoiding plagiarism. So I took a step back from that and grounded the chapter in the act of citation and looking at that as a way of linking your work to other people's work and why that's important, what that does, and how it's a dialogue between the work you're creating and the work of others. And once you understand this, it kind of helps you understand when to cite something a little bit better. And also, plagiarism becomes easier to understand because you also understand you're denying attribution and admitting evidence from your own writing, which then prevents others from following your own evidence trail in what you're trying to present. So after we explain kind of what citations are and how they work as an evidence trail, we moved on to the anatomy of citations, which is, just how they're put together and how they all kind of share these shared components, but in different orders and slightly different punctuation. But once you learn kind of to identify the different components, they're pretty easy to put together. We also talk about style guides and provide examples of 3 different styles to kind of show how they're similar and how they're different. And then lastly, we close with citation management, which was really nice because I got help from one of our local librarians who's been working with EndNote for over a decade. And I sat down with him and asked him what the most common questions grad students have when working with citation management. And he was able to provide some questions I had never even considered. And so we have both an introduction to citation management and how it works, as well as a nice FAQ section on some very basic things about how they work, how to troubleshoot them, and where to learn more information. Next slide. Okay, chapter 3 is literature searches, and this is really like librarian bread and butter territory because it's all about what we call information literacy. I co-wrote this chapter with a coworker, Kate Garrison, who developed and teaches our undergraduate course on information literacy. Unlike that course, though, this chapter could go into a lot more detail on how to search and locate literature. And we were able to cover advanced search techniques because we know they're more relevant to grad students than to undergrad students. There's a fairly lengthy section on Boolean searches, nesting, truncation, and proximity searching, which is something a lot of undergraduate students never bother to learn, but can make or break a literature search for a grad student. There's also practice exercises to help students obtain these skills for themselves. And we talk about how databases differ and what they cover and how they work, and why learning to use a specialty database is worthwhile because they come with special tools that can really affect your searches and save you a lot of time. Included in here, we also talk about how to get access to the full text because a very common misunderstanding is that searching for something is not the same as obtaining something, especially in the library world, where indexes and databases are more about telling you something exists than to tell you how to get it. So there's information on things like interlibrary loan and a tool we have called LibKey Nomad about how to obtain full text. We also included a section on how to read an article for relevance while you're doing these searches, because we found that while there was a lot of information on how to write articles, there was not a lot of easy information on how to read an article for relevance and how to kind of learn how to scan it and skim it to understand if it meets your search criteria or not. And of course, we had to cover AI for literature searches. In this chapter, we talked about two different kinds, both specific AI tools for literature searches and also some generic kinds as well, like ChatGPT. For those specific kinds, Kate did a whole workshop on this, so she was able to provide some really good, nice, concise information about what they're good for and what they're not, and as well as compare them to the different databases. Next slide. Chapter 4, we titled Demystifying the Publishing Process. This was a hard and difficult chapter to write, I'll admit. We start with just what is scholarly publishing, and to answer this, there's a lot of different ways you can answer this question, but I focused on the peer review process in economics as being defining traits of the publication process, of being the defining traits of scholarly communication. And this, they stood out because, sorry, I just lost my place. Oh, and we also decided to concentrate on journal articles because they're the most obtainable publication type for a new scholar, such as a graduate student. This helped focus the chapter, but we still had a lot to cover in only a certain number of pages. One of the things I think is special about this chapter and how it developed is we were able to include details about how to work with editors, from submitting a cover letter to defending revision decisions if you don't agree with your peer reviewers. These are things that are often admitted in overviews of the publication process, as are things such as plagiarism screening and how to take your peer reviews with grains of salt and not just literally every time you get a not so favorable review. We were also able to include information on where to publish and how to locate a good match for your article. And of course, we had to cover open access publishing, including open access green repositories, of which many theses and dissertations are within, as well as the gold and hybrid options, which are the paid options. To close the chapter, we talked about how to avoid predatory publishers, and for this, we chose a more nuanced approach than some of the other approaches you may find on the internet, which are very, very negative. And the reason for this is because the whole publishing process right now is rather predatory, no matter who you're publishing with. But it depends on who you're talking to. So we took this as a buyer beware approach, where everyone should be doing their own research with who they're publishing, deciding for themselves if they agree with the tactics and the conditions, and then if they do agree with them, publish with the publisher whose ethics align with their own. This approach encourages scholars to do their own research and to learn for themselves what their own expectations and quality standards are before they publish. Next slide, please. The research impact chapter, chapter 5. This was also a fun chapter to write because this is a personal interest of mine. The last chapter, and part of this is because I'm a data person, and it was important to me that the scholarly measures for impact be well explained and contextualized, because without context, data is just information. So for each measure of impact that we highlight in this chapter, we examined and provide an explanation of how it's calculated, where to find it, and how to use them. I also included examples of their misuse, as well as pushes to reform research metrics and things such as alt metrics, which can supplement traditional measures of research impact. Since in the last chapter, chapter 4, we covered open access, it was natural to place a short discussion about the advantage of publishing open access in this chapter as well. I also included PIDs, or persistent identifiers, because it's important for new scholars to establish their research identity, and PIDs, which link people and works together, is an excellent way to start this process. And this is a screenshot of a diagram that's included in the chapter that kind of explains this information. To close out chapter 5, we had a discussion of scholarly social networks, which is social media, LinkedIn, and more specialized platforms like ResearchGate and Knowledge Commons. Most of the time in the chapter is spent on how to use these networks to connect peers and promote your work, but we don't go into each platform in detail because we know they change constantly. So similar to how we treat AI, we focused on concept level competencies rather than how to do and how to use each piece of technology. Next slide. So the key findings for developing this section was that basic is not the same as simple. Next slide. As an example, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we had a flowchart of how the research publication process works? And I went online and I tried to find a good flowchart that already existed that would cover the steps we wanted to cover in the book, and I could not locate one. So then I sat down and said, well, how hard can it be? And I decided to make one myself. Well, then I sat down with Lily and Kristen and found out I was missing steps. Then I sat down with our scholarly publication librarian and found out I had done something incorrectly. Well, many revisions later, we came up with a chart that is not what I would call basic and not what I would call simple, but it is at least easy to read and complete. And we have a nice explanation that goes along with this flow chart that explains every single step so that students can understand where they are in the process, both before they enter it and during. Next slide. One of the other key findings is that there's just no consensus on some of these topics. I mentioned earlier there's no consensus on the different types of literature reviews are out there. There's no consensus on what's a predatory publisher. There's no consensus on just what the peer review process is, because it differs journal to journal, editor to editor, and discipline to discipline. So it was pretty hard to provide a general introduction to a lot of these quote unquote basic topics, but to make it something approachable for a new scholar. The other thing is that scholarly publishing is full of ethical landmines and disciplinary conventions. So it was hard to know what to include and what to include in detail and what to kind of skim over. For this, I kind of stuck with the just the facts, Jack kind of situation, kind of mentality, where present the facts in a most unbiased as possible manner, let the students come to their own conclusion, and then just help them make good decisions. The last key finding I had for this section was that grad students must quickly obtain fluencies that are both academic and professional, even if they don't realize it as soon as they enter grad school. The literature review can start really early in your career, especially if you're a master's student. And so just getting these fluencies about what is a literature review, how do I use a database, what are citations, and then going up to there to how do I publish. It's quick, it's only a number of months. And so writing this chapter really helped me kind of realize just how fast it moves and how many skills graduate students are learning in addition to their academic skill sets they're getting in school. Next slide. The last thing I wanted to acknowledge was that this was a lot of collaboration. While I wrote most of the work, most of it myself, a lot of this also came with co-workers who helped me when I had questions, as well as colleagues at other schools, including a medical librarian and an esoteric specialist who is a friend of mine. And Lilia Kristen also were great and guided me through and helped me with the decision-making process when I ran into a dead end a few times. So it takes a village to raise a child. It also takes a small village to write a book chapter, much less 5 book chapters, it turns out. And now I think, next slide, we have a little bit of Q&A if there are any questions about part 1 basics.
Well, anyone who wants to unmute, please feel free.
Where can I get a copy? Oh, that's a good point. Kristen, do you remember if we talked about this in the wrap up?
I don't think we have it on a slide, but I'll get the link right now.
Okay, so the short answer is it's in editing right now. We are preparing to put it online this semester and it should be ready by January is, I think, our goal, right? Or is it December?
I'm pushing for December.
Okay, so we're hoping for December.
Okay, let's go with Rachel and then Terry.
Yeah, hi, thank you. That was a great presentation and a great resource. I look forward to seeing it when it's available too. I'm just wondering how much like maintenance you anticipate doing on this and whether that is going to be the same folks who created it or where that responsibility lives.
We already expect to probably have a second version that needs to be made sooner rather than later, but we're hoping it will be probably a year or two before we have to release it. Honestly, I wrote these sections to be as maintenance free as possible. And part of that is, again, instead of focusing on technology, like going into details about AI, we focused on the conceptual parts because AI is really just a tool. It's how you use it, not how the technology changes that we want to emphasize with this. And that is why ethics, which is a whole section of the book, became a really big focus throughout the book, especially when we had to figure out how to integrate AI through the whole thing. So we're hoping it won't need too much maintenance over time, but we do already anticipate to release an updated version in the future.
I would like to add, Megan, that our librarian who oversees all the open educational resource said that she would prefer second editions come out no earlier than 2 years. So that's kind of why we had to keep that in mind and make sure that it was going to contain information that didn't have to be updated constantly.
That's right. I forgot about that. So we definitely wrote this with the idea that it wouldn't need to be updated for 2 years. I forgot about that, Lily. Thank you. And apologies, I just remembered my camera wasn't on, so now I've turned it on.
It's nice to see you, Megan. Terry, I think you had a question and then we'll go to John in the chat.
Okay, thank you. This may not be able to be addressed, in this format, but talking about the basics, right? And not making assumptions on what kind of information and experience are these incoming graduate students, what do they have? I'm just wondering, for anybody who has been working in their field for at least 5+ years, have you seen a decline, let's say, in familiarity? I mean, I remember when I taught composition, I was taking undergrads into the library for literacy, education. And I'm just wondering, how decentralized is this process of teaching someone how to do a literature review, for example? So,
I think a lot of that depends on the discipline. Some disciplines are very well connected here at Iowa State with their library and their librarian. So when I was doing that kind of work, I had one department and I had a couple faculty that every time they got a new grad student, one of the first things they did was like, go talk to Megan. You'll have an hour with her. It'll save you a lot of time. And they would even do it with some undergrads, but in some cases that didn't happen, and so it was pretty decentralized. And some disciplines also just tend to be more I'm trying to think of the right word, but entrepreneurial in how they view the grad student experience. So it's more of the try it, and if it breaks, try it again and fix it. While others are more cautious and more research based. So it really differs a lot. So I don't think there's really been a decline. It's just that it's different discipline to discipline, department to department, and school to school.
Thank you. So John asked in the chat, how do you disseminate this information on campus, seminars, LibGuides, and brochures?
We're still working on that. Right now, we're starting to do some outreach before the book's even out. It will also be integrated into a couple of courses, which will help disseminate it as well. And there are some courses that, even if it's not integrated into the course, will tell the instructors and they might be able to provide it as supplementary information. I believe we're also hoping that advisors will start using it too, not just students. But, you know, creating something and hoping it gets used are two different things. So we took care of the created part and we'll do what we can to make sure it gets used.
So, and then Tatiana asked in the chat, do these guides take into account all majors, or are there sections specific for sciences, liberal arts, etc.?
I tried to do it general so it covers everything a little bit, but nothing in detail. So again, it's meant for the general scholar and the beginning scholar. The hope is that if they find something here that it piques their interest, they'll take some of the advice to seek help to learn more. So there is a not very subtle go talk to your librarian note in a couple sections for help if you want help, because that is their job and they would love to help you, for example, for literature reviews and such. So
I think I will move on, if you don't mind, and just to make sure that we are on track. But I would like to also add that, you know, with the book, we built in strategies for graduate students at Iowa State, but then we also make it generalized so that any institution, if you know, some policies and guidance may be different. So we say at your institution, you may want to go search up if there are certain specific guidance or policies at your university for your own needs. So in that sense, it's generalized, but then there are strategies for student or users. So I will keep the questions going, and Megan will probably keep track of her questions that she can answer at the end. But I will move on to our next section, which is part 2, ethics. Kristen? Next slide. And so in this section, we cover 4 topics. And I was in charge of writing this. And I thought, well, you know, I've dealt with enough questions and I've learned enough that I'm sure it's easy enough to write, right? These chapters were extremely hard to write because it needed to be so accurate. And I will say that I did not do all of this by myself. And I want to go back to Megan's acknowledgement of all the people that she conferred with. You know, remember the silo analogy? Even within the library, there were many silos. So you can imagine the number of silos that we have to navigate to get information. So I want to say upfront, you know, I worked with the Office of Research Ethics and Legal Counsel and Commercialization Office. So many people contributed to making sure that I was writing this accurately. Next slide. So chapter 6 essentially talks about research ethics, regulations, and protocols. And we start off with understanding what research ethics is, okay? There are 3 main categories or types of ethics. Personal ethics are ones that we are impacted by values we learn from our spheres of influences. And they can impact how we interpret results and make decisions in our research. So an example would be two people can agree that murder is wrong, but disagree on the issue of abortion because of their personal beliefs. So that makes up the personal ethics. Now, disciplinary ethics here refer to the standard of conduct within professional bodies. So an example would be for medical doctors is the Hippocratic oath that they must take. Institutional or organizational ethics provide guiding principles for research and determine that steps are taken to protect research subjects. At universities, for example, we have the institutional review boards, IRBs, that provide guidelines to protect human subjects. And there are different committees usually at universities. Now, the next one that we focus on is ethics versus regulation. And by regulation, I mean law, right? Legal stuff. So most societies have legal rules about what can or cannot be done. But then ethical norms are broader and sometimes they are informal and not stated. So it becomes a tricky situation where in some cases studies can be considered legal but unethical. And then in some other cases, it can be illegal but ethical. Now, the distinction between ethics and regulation is important because as scholars and early researchers, you must comply with legal requirements, but at the same time, you must also maintain high ethical standards because that is the foundation to what publishing science is all about. If there's no credibility, then what's the point of research? What's the point of disseminating finding of scientific research, right? So now the last right column on the top row here in red talks about institutional compliance. And this one focuses on the how and the why. Now we're looking at the universities. Universities have research committees like IRB, and then they also have training policies. So graduate students, early scholars, you are conducting research at your institution. So therefore, you have to look at what your institution requires. Now, the reason why it's important to comply, well, because non-compliance can cause lots of damages. There are three that we emphasize on. Number one, it is a loss of data and productivity. If you have to start all over because you didn't comply, you just lost time, money, and so forth. It can impact your reputation. For example, if your publication was retracted, you've seen in the news, there are so many retractions these days, and partly because technology is more advanced and it's easy to find wrongdoings, right? So don't think that your work will slip under the radar. I think one of the common questions that come to me now is like, why are we detecting so many more issues of research misconduct? It's because previously, theses and dissertations were hard copies in the library. So you can't just click a button in the tool and highlight what all was done wrong. But now everything is digital. Plus also it's widely open access through institutional repository, ProQuest, and so forth. So it is more visible now with added visibility also comes with added responsibility. So more than ever, there is a need to comply. And then the last reason here that I wanted to mention is, you know, because it's related to regulations, you can be fined, you can be jailed, and your institution could lose funding and privileges. So this is on a bigger scale than just you. It's also the reputation of your institution. Your whole institution could be blacklisted. So now here in the bottom box on the right, I put a scenario here that's more relevant to theses and dissertations, and you'll see this style throughout our book. We'll try to include scenarios that is more relevant to thesis and dissertation or something specific. So for this particular one, we say, imagine a graduate student who has successfully defended the oral exam, but then at the time of the thesis and dissertation review, our reviewer will ask like, oh, okay, you have human subjects, include your IRB letter, right? And if this person says, well, what is IRB? Or I didn't have an IRB. So in that particular situation, that means the whole dissertation has to be done all over from the start, because by the standards, you have to get your IRB before you even start collecting data. And if your research collected data and wrote about the data, it doesn't matter. Everything is nullified because IRB decisions cannot be retroactive. So keep that one in mind. Now, the last box on, which is the only red box on the second row, talks about research misconduct. And this is very important, I feel, because what's missing from a lot of the official graduate education is the importance of being an ethical researcher and why it's important. And research misconduct here, there are only 3 that qualify for research misconduct. And first one is fabrication, and that's where making up data or results and recording or reporting them. Falsification is manipulating research materials, equipment, or processes, or changing or omitting data or results so that the research is not accurately represented in the record. And plagiarism, which is the appropriation of another person's ideas, processes, results, or words without giving proper credit. Now, I think that graduate students and early scholars are under the pressure to publish and produce research. So sometimes shortcuts can lead to a research misconduct investigation. Now, together with this, you'll see in the little arrow to the left, this is my representation of Gen AI. So there are these three reasons are tied to why we need to understand how Gen AI works and why it matters, right? So in a nutshell here, hallucination that you've heard about with the use of Gen AI, it can lead to fabrication because the response from Gen AI is not accurate. Now, if you use the response and you don't know the source, you could end up plagiarizing. And if you're using Gen AI to help you even create a visual to illustrate something, it could lead to falsification because your intention to highlight something has made the visual inaccurate. So all of these potential pitfalls is something that graduate students and early scholars need to understand what's happening when they're using Gen AI. Next slide. So in chapter 7, I looked at copyright from 2 perspectives, one as the author and one as the user. Now, I do want to point out again that the content here focused primarily on article publication because our intended audience is graduate students and early scholars who have to publish their research. So the basics covered in the first part here in chapter 7 looks at what copyright means and how it works. And then we looked at what publishing licenses are and how that differs from copyright. That's a very confusing concepts when students don't understand, or even faculty is like, what is copyright? What is license? But I break it down and then I talk about why we need to understand the differences between the two, because when you are an author, you need to understand what rights you own and then what rights you want to share with your readers. So for example, our book here, our OER here is considered open access, and we plan to include a Creative Commons license that lets our readers know what they can do with this resource without having to reach out to us every time for permission. So when this is published, you are free to use this, integrate as is, modify, as long as you give us the attribution and follow the Creative Commons license that we've specified it to. So the matching scenario below then really talks about a common question we get from our students when they see this question in ProQuest about the $75 copyright fee. Just to explain, we use ProQuest as our ETD administration platform, and ProQuest will have a question there to the students when they're uploading to their account. Do you want ProQuest to file the copyright for you? I can tell you the number of times I get phone calls and emails having to explain this. And they will say like, well, do I have to sign this on? Do I have to accept this? So we don't really tell them whether they should or shouldn't do it. Instead, we explain what it is for and give them guiding questions so they can decide if they want to, sign up for the service or not. And also, our thesis and dissertation are publicly available through our institutional repository since we are a land-grant institution. So for this particular situation, we wanted to make sure that our publishing agreement spells out the details of the copyright, that it is retained by the students, but then our institution has the license to distribute it along with ProQuest. But we also want to explain that this is not an exclusive license, right? Now, the next red box in the middle looks at how to deal with publishers as an author. So graduate students have to publish when they get an acceptance letter. They are so excited. It is a big milestone to be accepted. And then when it comes to signing the publishing contract, they look at this page and rows of text that they don't understand. All they do is just sign and say, yippee, I'm done. Now, first of all, when you don't understand what you're signing, you can inadvertently sign away some rights that you don't mean to. It is important to understand what happens when they're signing their contract. They can negotiate their contract. In most cases, publishers only ask for exclusive license to distribute because they can then charge readers for access, right? That's how the publishing world works. But then in some cases, the contract may include a sign off on copyright. So it is important to understand what you're signing off on. Now, how does it impact your graduate students and their thesis and dissertations? So like I said before, sometimes our graduate students are so excited, they sign off without understanding what they're signing off. At our institution, and I know at some other institutions, we allow the journal style dissertation where you can incorporate previously published articles as chapters. Here's where the knowledge becomes crucial. If you have signed a contract that gives the journal exclusive license to distribute, then you may actually need to request their permission for you to include your manuscript back into your thesis or dissertation. And if it's recently published, the publishers may need you to embargo your version so that it's not free. Because if it's free, then why would people go pay, right? And here's where we need to explain what embargo means and why you may or may not want to use it. But proactively, we can teach our students to negotiate their rights, to include their article in their thesis and dissertation at the time of signing their contract so that they don't have to deal with this issue at the time when they're ready to graduate, not at the last minute. The last red box on the right, the concept here relates to the copyright for users. Now, one of the common things we've heard about is fair use, and there's often a misperception that we can often use this. So graduate students just say, yep, I'll just grab this image, I'll grab this table, I'll grab this figure, and I'll incorporate that into my research because it's for learning. Well, it is likely okay in the class setting if you're writing a class paper, okay? But most graduate students' class papers eventually turn into some research paper. And then maybe you might have it published. Then at that point, the rules have changed. You are now using someone else's work that you have not gotten permission for. And that can lead to copyright infringement. Now, remember in the beginning when I shared the copyright infringement case? Well, that was because the student had worked on a creative component and did not think that the rule applied to her because it wasn't a thesis or dissertation. It wasn't research, quote unquote. However, because the creative component was made publicly accessible to everyone through our institutional repository, now the rules have changed. And so we put a scenario here to help our scholars or graduate students consider what are best practices, how to read licenses, who and when they need to contact for permission, and how to store those permissions. Next slide. This chapter here talks about authorship and embargoes. And so the first part here, we are talking about who qualifies to be an author, who doesn't qualify to be an author. This is important because there are many investigations that are leading to retractions or research misconduct. And some examples are ghost anonymous authorship, gift or honorary authorship, paid authorship, and coercive authorship. So it's really important to let your graduate students know that, hey, you can't just squeeze somebody else's name because that person needs to get tenured. There needs to be an accountability to the contribution that on those papers. There's also a section to figure out how to navigate authorship order and the responsibility so you can minimize conflicts when it comes to publishing. And here's one of the things that we find useful is the credit taxonomy that outlines each role that the person plays. Now, even publishers are also requiring statements with manuscript. Again, going back to the introduction I talked about, remember the scenario where I said there are two similar dissertations? We utilized this and created two versions of shared consent forms. Then that gives a transparency to minimize confusion to readers. And also then the embargoes I talked about earlier, when students may want to consider using those embargoes. The bottom three callouts draw attention to specific details and steps to navigate guidelines, policies, and practices. I'm going to move on to the next, plagiarism tools. You know, we start with an explanation of what it means and what it's not. Plagiarism, we've discovered, is mostly unintentional because scholars don't know how and why citations are important. Now with Gen AI, it becomes a bigger issue. And so it's really important to focus on teaching your stakeholders, whether it's graduate students or faculty or administrators, what plagiarism tools do and what they don't do. You'll see many tools that promise to detect plagiarism or Gen AI use. At this point, our biggest challenge is to educate our stakeholders in understanding that these tools don't exist. For example, Authenticate checks for similarities. They are not plagiarism detectors. So if you want to use such tools in your thesis and dissertation process, don't make it like punitive, because then it turns into a numbers strategy. Like, how many percent do I need to get a pass? Or if you're using it to detect Gen AI, well, there are counter tools to trick yours, right? So I think that it really needs to be focused on educating our scholars on how to be effective, efficient, and ethical scholars rather than punitive. So I'll go to the findings really quickly. I find that most of the issues are the lack of understanding of the impact of our thesis and dissertation. Is not just another class paper. It's not just to get your degree. It does contribute to the larger pool of science. And ethics is not really emphasized in graduate education, so nobody teaches them. And then not teaching our graduate students how to manage their rights. It's also an issue because then they end up having to do more runarounds at the end. And then obviously the last two I've talked about, unintentional plagiarism and detection tools. So I think for this sake of time, I will just take 2 questions at this point. And then the rest of you, if you just want to type your questions in, we'll take those questions at the end. So Kim, go ahead and I'll hand it to you to call on 2 names.
Kim, we can see your mouth moving, but we cannot hear you.
I think I see Molly has her hand up.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Molly, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Just quickly, especially particularly since we were talking about ethics, I want to make sure, forgive me for not knowing this information, this book, is this something that I can take back to my institution and potentially provide to other instructors? Because I have some specific faculty members in mind that I know would be extremely excited to have a resource like this in their work. And so I wanted to see if that would be permissible or if there was some kind of limitations, because I don't want
Yes.
to.
That's the whole goal of this open educational resource. It's going to be free for everyone. And the Creative Commons license allows you to just integrate specific chapters or the whole entire book. You can link it once it's at our institutional repository. Anyone can use it, and you can also link to specific chapters of the book. So yes.
That is so incredible to hear. Thank you all so much for all your hard work on this. It's an incredible resource.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question? All right. Well, if you do have some questions, feel free to type them in the chat and I'll pick them up at the end.
Right, I'll go ahead and take it from here. The next part of the OER book is all about technology. And the section has 6 chapters. A little bit of background on me. This last section of the book has been very much a labor of love and a dump of all the knowledge that I've obtained over basically my whole career as first a technical writer who was using Microsoft Word to make user manuals at a company, and then as an ETD administrator who works with graduate students to prepare thesis and dissertations. So the content of these chapters is very much everything that I find myself continuously telling students and educating them about. Let's go ahead and start with chapter 10, applications for writing. As we all know, graduate students come from a wide range of backgrounds and they have very different starting knowledge when they start working on their thesis or dissertation. So I do try to start here with very basic definitions of what is a word processor and what can it do. I explain what proofing tools are typically included in word processors, and I focus on the ones that I have used over the course of my life as a student and professional: Google Docs, Microsoft Word, Apache OpenOffice. And I sort of compare and contrast those writing applications. And I also try to give a little bit of guidance on things like using the viewing and editing modes in a critical way, understanding how to manage files. It's very sad to me when students lose work because of poor file management strategies. And when they're using a word processor and that's their way of interfacing with a computer, that is often also their way of managing their files. So I try to give a little bit of guidance on how to do that in a strategic way so they don't lose their work. And then also just explaining what happens when you use a word processor to create a file of another type. Of course, I'm thinking PDF because that's what the electronic thesis ends up as. And so trying to just give them that higher level of digital literacy that you're converting from one file type to another, and you're actually making some sort of background changes that may be unpredictable. In that chapter, I also introduce a few other writing tools that have to do with writing, but aren't word processors, like Grammarly Tutor, which is a resource that's available only to Iowa State University students. So that may not be as useful for you all, but actually in the age of generative AI, I think there's been some development of research writing tutor type technologies that are available to everybody, not just Iowa State students. And then I give a little shout out to a really nice tool for academic writers called the Academic Phrase Bank. It helps you think about how to express your ideas in an academic kind of language. So it gives you phrase snippets and present ideas that have to do with certain rhetorical goals, like contrasting an idea that was quoted from literature. So those are some of the topics that are covered in chapter 10. And then in chapter 11, I contrast the idea of writing with the idea of formatting. And I introduce 3 tools that we use at Iowa State for thesis and dissertation formatting. So the first one is Microsoft Word, and I talk about how in Microsoft Word you can format for digital accessibility, how you can handle your citations and bibliography, ways of handling math, which is a very common type of content that our graduate students include in their thesis and dissertations. Integrations for Word, so the little add-on apps that you can connect to Microsoft Word, like Zotero or Grammarly, to make it more functional in the way that you desire, and then where to access support and documentation for Word. The same sections are provided for LaTeX. So many of you will be familiar with LaTeX. It is not a word processor. It's a typesetting programming language that many people use to create their thesis or dissertation. And I think earlier in the new ETD administrators talk, somebody mentioned that Larry's book is going to be set in LaTeX. So I talk about those same topics, how to do digital accessibility, citations, and bibliography, and so forth. Lastly, this chapter covers Adobe Acrobat Pro DC, which is a tool that you can use to remediate a PDF for digital accessibility. I talk about mainly its limitations as far as document composition and editing. Adobe Acrobat is not a word processor. It's not really made for document composition, and where to find support and documentation for Acrobat. In chapter 12, I get really into the weeds with formatting text, and I hope that this is well received by our community in particular, because I know that I have spent countless hours working with students, teaching them how to format text in Microsoft Word. And so I try to create all of that content in a very easy to access and easy to cross-reference place here in this chapter. I talk about text and its affordances, how you can use it to convey information electronically and share it very easily, how text can be used to relate information logically, and then I give a very detailed rant, perhaps, about outlining, my beliefs about outlining, and how that connects to topics like headings. And then I go into format attributes and style. I contrast character attributes from paragraph and page attributes. This is because I see students often get confused about what level their attribute is acting at, and then their attributes start kind of clashing with each other, and then they say, I hate Microsoft Word. Well, hopefully people can understand, how complex and sophisticated Microsoft is by looking at this and understanding at the conceptual level what's going on in their long and complex document. And then I also give a few recommendations for styles for research publishing, just to help people make sure that their thesis or dissertation is looking conventional. So I talk about, body style, heading styles, captioning, numbering figures and tables, and those kinds of details. Now, I don't expect anybody to read this chapter top to bottom. It's long. it's detailed, but what I like about the ebook format is that you can link to a part of a chapter and go straight to it. So this is what I'm hoping, that we can use the formatting chapter to directly send students to what they need for electronic thesis formatting. Chapter 13, I go into a little bit more detail about formatting figures. I explain the kinds of things that you can do with figures in Microsoft Word. I give more detail about figure numbering and captions, and separated graphic content. I wish I knew what that bullet point meant. I'm sorry, but I'm maybe been doing a little bit of public speaking panicking right now, but I have no idea what that refers to. So I'll get back to you. Chapter 14 is very parallel to chapter 13. Instead of figures, now we're talking about tables. It explains the anatomy of a table and table attributes. All of this is very much leading up to how to make tables accessible. And similarly, chapter 13 is leading up to how to make figures accessible, understanding that you're not just looking at some kind of picture on a page, but that there is a lot of design that goes into it, and a lot of design that you'll never see with your eyes, but that is very helpful for computers to understand what is contained in that graphic, and also to give alternatives for those who are not going to see the graphic at all. Chapter 15, this is sort of my personal tips and tricks as somebody who has edited many very long documents. I understand that that is a daunting task, and I also know that you can give yourself tons of rework if you don't understand some of the strategies for formatting a very long document. So I talk about electronic format accessibility. I teach how to use the accessibility tools in Word and Acrobat DC. I explain how to format from top to bottom so that you don't create a lot of rework for yourself. And then I also introduce accessibility checkers so that people can understand that those tools are out there and what they can and cannot do. Key findings for me: students do use multiple technologies to prepare their ETD. They almost certainly use a word processor, but they might also use some other tools that have to do with composition, formatting, and preparing the final file. And their technology skills vary widely. Some of them are absolute dynamos, and they're teaching me tips that I've never heard of before. And that's incredible that we have that. But even the same student might have absolutely no knowledge of something else in a word processor. And some students just, see it differently from how I do. And so that can make communication a challenge. The technology documentation, especially for Microsoft Word, is so robust, but it doesn't necessarily suit the specific constraints of ETDs. So we can't always just say like, oh, here's how you use this feature in Microsoft Word. Go to Microsoft website and learn about that feature, because it's not what our institutional template requires. And so we do need to very often give specific advice for our institution's requirements and templates. And like I said earlier, these chapters just contain the knowledge I've accumulated from years of technical writing and electronic thesis and dissertation administration. We can do some Q&A, I guess. We have time. We've got 11 minutes till the end of our session, but we do have a conclusion after this.
Okay, Molly.
Oh, I'm
Oh,
just
Molly.
cheering. Sorry. Thank you so
It's
much.
okay.
It was an incredible.
Thank you.
That's very nice to hear. Thank you.
Kristen, I think maybe we can move to the questions for the audience.
Okay. Yeah, we're just going to kind of put these prompts out there so that we can stimulate a conversation.
And thank you to everyone who already provided some ideas on some of these topics in the chat too.
Well, I'll jump in. My name's Elizabeth McDonald, and I was the one that asked where we could get it because I was interested in sending this information. We host a dissertation writers workshop, and I was thinking that would be something that could be listed on the home pages, and specific parts of the workshop could point to that, which is why I'm very interested in hearing about when this goes public, so I can let them know.
So Liz, I would recommend, please join the community engagement, the USETDA community engagement group.
Okay.
There is a link on the USETDA homepage that will take you to the community engagement group, and also join the format user group. A lot of the inspiration for at least the technology chapters came from my participation in the format user group.
Okay.
As the minute this book comes out, I will definitely be emailing directly people on those two lists.
Okay.
To just say, hey, everybody, we talked about the book at the conference. It's on the website. Here's the link. We'll be shouting it from the rooftops. So make sure that you're somewhere near the rooftop that we're going to be shouting from. And that's the community engagement group and the formatting user group.
Okay, and I will also let our dissertation writers workshop, the person who heads this, know that this is forthcoming, so that she's aware that there's going to be a good resource.
Please do. That would be so wonderful.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question or comment?
Terry, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. So it has occurred to me that in a very small way, we've done portions of what you've put together so brilliantly, but in connection with our silos, right? Our writing center, our specific librarians, responsible conduct of research training, which we do annually, even like teaching assistant training and orientation. And so I think what is so brilliant about this is it encapsulates and brings together the relationship, you know, of everyone, and everyone has a part. And I think it really, depending on kind of who's in charge, right, in your institution, like, do you have a grad council or faculty senate? Is it, you know, a little bit more hierarchical than that? Is it fully administration? But this provides a support to whomever the stakeholders are, whomever the decision makers are. This is a support on the pooling of these resources and the need for collaboration and cooperation. So brilliant, just brilliant, just brilliant. I can't wait till this is released. Oh my gosh. Thank you.
We are excited too, Terry. We cannot wait till this is released. We've been anticipating it so eagerly.
Absolutely. I can't wait also. John, did you have a question?
Thanks, Kim. Just could you remind our audience in what formats this will be distributed? I'm sure it'll be electronic, but are there print formats scheduled, or what's happening with this?
I can
maybe
field
you
that.
know.
Yeah, so I can field that question. So this will be published with our university digital press. So it will be an ebook, it will be live on the web, and I think you'll be able to download it as both a EPUB and a PDF, as well as just view it on a web page. We don't have print copies planned for now. We just honestly, it was a big enough project without going that extra step. So we're hoping this will be good, but we'll wait and see what happens next.
Oftentimes that plants a seed, and if they see potential revenues in the arena, then they maybe will go for a print format. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have 5 more minutes if anyone has any other questions.
Then would you move on to the next slide as well?
So
next.
That was the end of the show. I do want to at least talk about, well, we can talk about the release. So I typed this link into the chat. This is a shortened link that will update as soon as the ebook is out. This link is going to go straight to the ebook. Right now it goes to a little teaser webpage, but as soon as the book is released, it will go, I'll redirect the short link to there. And then just as an FYI, we have already started incorporating this book content into our graduate studies courses, and one library course and a non-credit Canvas course for thesis and dissertation preparation that automatically graduate students, as soon as they apply to graduate, they automatically get enrolled in this Canvas organization. So there's chapters of the ebook integrated into that. So if that gives you any ideas for how you might use the ebook on your campus, terrific. And lastly, thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts, I think all three of our hearts, to the many people who contributed as consultants, as reviewers, and as, helping us through the publication process. We do want to name everybody and thank them.
And just to point out, on this list of names, we have two of them in this audience, Kim and John. Big thank you.
I'm sure we're both happy that everyone's happy to help. And this is just such a needed resource. We are so glad that this is coming out soon. So thank you. Anyone else have anything in the chat or a question they want to quickly ask before we close this out? All right. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. There will be a short break, and then we will have parallel sessions, one here, one in a breakout room at 3:40 p.m. The first one is, I'm hoping I'm sharing the right screen here. Win-win apprenticeships, team cataloging ETDs at 2 Ohio Link libraries, presented by Michael Monaco and Seven McCutcheon. And then breakout 2 will have enhancing layout understanding via human in the loop, a user study on the PDF to HTML conversion for long documents, presented by Chenyu Muao from Virginia Tech and Edward Fox from Virginia Tech. So we look forward to seeing you at 3:40 p.m.